Good afternoon, Eastern Washington. This is Matt Shea, and welcome to Patriot Radio, broadcasting live from the capital of free Washington and soon-to-be proposed state of liberty, Spokane Valley, brought to you once again by the Committee to Elect Matt Shea, Republican, and the legacy of Dr. Stan Monteith, bringing you the story behind the story and the news behind the news. It's not about right and left. It's about right and wrong. It's about our hope being not in man, but in Jesus Christ. It's about not ending in prayer, but moving to action. And it's about Ephesians 2:5-6. God, who made us alive together with Christ and raised us up with him and seated us with him in the heavenly places in Christ Jesus. Now, this show, it is in the legacy of Dr. Stan Monteith, after all. We're going to be talking about a couple of subjects before we get to our guests that are, shall we say, controversial. But the fact of the matter is, folks, we need to think, okay? We need to take the facts and think. Even if it leads us to a conclusion we may not want to hear, we need to think. And the purpose behind my posts on Facebook is to make people think. Now, some people try to claim that posting things is whipping people into hysteria, but you'll see and note that the way that I write in the titles is to make people think. Why is this out there? Why has this not been talked about? You know, here's the thing. All the people that try to debunk things, that's conspiracy theory. That can't be true. When you really drill down on what they know, it's not much. They're usually not very well-read people. And if they are well-read, you have to ask them what they've read. And a lot of times what I find out is they have not read the primary source documents. They've read what somebody says the primary source documents say. Or they will rely on a study that's not peer-reviewed, or a study that may be peer-reviewed but has been challenged by other studies, and they're not willing to have that intellectual debate over it. And I've learned over the last 10 years specifically that most of the concerns that have been brought up in the alternative media particularly, the New American, even Alex Jones, WorldNet Daily, and a lot of other publications have been more correct than the mainstream media, have been more accurate, more prescient than the mainstream media. Told us about things that were going to happen years before they did, and they sure enough did. So when they're right, and the same people keep coming back going, oh, that's just conspiracy theory, that's just conspiracy theory, it's just, and that's kind of this parroted mantra, really imbecilic in the fact that it lacks primary source documentation or any sort of intellectual argument behind it. You got to ask yourself a question. Are people really thinking? Or are we just finding our source to parrot and not really digging into it? Alex Jones has been wrong. WorldNet Daily's been wrong. A couple things that I've read in there I challenged. But the fact of the matter is we need to think and go with those places that are more accurate about what's happening, what's coming, than the mainstream media and the comfortable place of just not knowing about things. And so I want to preface this, because I'm going to be talking about a couple of things. One of them is MK Ultra. The other is weather modification. Now, a lot of you remember my show with Ed Berry, who was this guy is one of the most learned, meteorological scientists in the country. Okay, he helped start the weather modification program in Vietnam. Okay, so he knows, and I wanted to get the expert on. But I discovered something last week that made me angry because I had been lied to my face in Olympia multiple times when I asked the question, and I'm going to get to that here in a second. But the fact of the matter is that keep questioning, keep thinking, keep reading. And remember, as most of you that have seen my 51st State presentation, that this area of the country that some in downtown Seattle call the place of hicks and rednecks and rubes, and whatever other derogatory name they want to use, remember, this part of the country is more intelligently literate by a lot than the left coast and downtown Seattle specifically. A lot more intelligently literate. And they actually track that. I have a map that shows the percentages. And what is intelligent literacy? It doesn't mean you're just literate, but you're actually reading poetry and plays and history and novels, and you're learning. And it's interesting, too, because a lot of novels have been used to tell history in modern times. So I'm going to pause here for a second. So give me a second because I got to pull a couple things up. I'm going to pause here for a second. And we're going to get into this, okay? And I want you to go research what I'm talking about, all right? Go look up the primary source, not what somebody says about them, but the actual physical documents themselves. So just give me a second. All right. And that's going to bring us now to your daily intelligence briefing. I'm going to start on the international front. We're going to get to these items here in a second. On the international front, in the Middle East, a couple of things happening right now that we need to discuss because it's very curious. Iran has started a military buildup in Syria on the border with Israel. In addition to that, you have President Trump, the French President, Macron, the German Chancellor, all meeting. And they're discussing the Iran deal. It looks like, according to Debka file, that Trump has started indirect negotiations with Iran. And this is ahead of moving to China. What I believe is going to be Korean peace talks. Now, you don't want to overhype anything, but this summit with the North Korean leader is the closest thing we've had to true peace talks on an equal footing in a very, very long time. You know, some past presidents just didn't take this approach. Trump's approach has gotten the leader to the table to talk in terms of peace and do some goodwill steps ahead of that summit to show they're serious. Now, I want to mention, too, that Israel right now has raised the red flag about Russia sending these advanced anti-air systems to Syria. And Russia has confirmed it, these SA-300s, and has warned of a, quote, catastrophic price for interfering. You know, whatever that means. But there is a divide now between the U.S. generals and Israeli leadership about Trump's exit plan from Syria. So apparently Trump is still wanting to leave Syria, and you can take a look at this all on the Debka file. But the fact of the matter is that Macron, Trump, Merkel talking is going to have some profound effect and changes over the next couple of weeks in the course of the Middle East. But it looks like the next main event is Iran, Israel, and some iteration of that. All right. Also, and this is breaking news from one of our listeners. Apparently, right near, or right between Moses Lake and Ritzville here in Washington, was a string of cars. Not sure exactly which direction they were headed, but it had the license plates Council on them, with a couple of Penske trucks in front of them. It actually sounds like maybe the Russian council closing in Seattle. I don't know. Anyway, we'll get some more information on that, but that's kind of a little bit of an odd thing to occur, so I decided to bring it up here on the show. Okay, getting back to the international front, I suspect that if there is this summit regarding Kim, you're going to also have a summit with Russia, too, at some point in the near future. Also on the international front, Venezuela, starvation and suicides up due to the hyperinflation. 8,000% inflation since last year. Now, again, a lot of people saying it would never happen in modern times, but the fact of the matter is there's a book called When Money Dies. Read it. This is what happens as an end result of socialism. Okay? On the national front, swarm drones finally acknowledged and officially debuting. The Department of Defense putting out a video on them. Kind of freaky, actually. But looks like dozens and dozens of drones totally coordinated around specific objectives. Also on the national front, Scott Pruitt, head of the EPA, taking a very good approach, I believe, to these so-called scientific studies that are relied upon by, like, the Department of Ecology here in Washington, the EPA. And these studies were kept from the public. And so Scott Pruitt proposed a transparency rule that just simply would ban the agency from using any studies that bar public access to the underlying data. Don't you want scientific studies to be vetted? I mean, isn't that, because even if a study is peer-reviewed, don't misunderstand that that's some kind of panacea that and this is key, science is a method. People miss that today. Science is a method to get to the truth. And so you're supposed to be able to replicate experiments just like the other person did to validate the hypothesis or the idea that prompted you to do the study in the first place. So why would you not want those things tested? Very interesting that all of a sudden the environmentalists lose it over this. And that specifically studies linking air pollution and pesticide exposure to harmful health effects would suddenly not be used. And this would delete decades of science. Well, wait a minute. All he's saying is just allow the public access to vet the data. Other scientists, i.e., and so I find it very, very interesting. In Olympia, you will have the Department of Ecology relying on studies that are not very well vetted to make wide-ranging policies that have dramatic and significant implications for average citizens. Now, the EPA, okay, times that times 10, 100, I don't know. The fact of the matter is we should be able to look at those things and vet them. And the EPA, and this is from WorldNet Daily, quote, and this is a quote apparently of Scott Pruitt, for decades the EPA has improperly claimed massive power to regulate nearly every aspect of our economy and lives. It's long overdue that the EPA should make such data and collection methods available for public review and analysis. Amen. Amen. I just don't understand why they would fight that, but that must mean there's an agenda, huh? Okay, let's move next to something else, the CDC. Now, on Saturday, it was great to see all the folks who showed up for the March for Our Rights, defending the right to bear arms. I had heard from a few people that, they'd heard a couple farmers talking, hey, Matt, you got to hear what these farmers have to say. They really don't think anybody should have an AR-15. Their hunting rifles are fine. If you don't understand why people have an AR-15, you do not understand freedom. We have AR-15s for the exact moment when they say we should not have them. Understand what that means. That's what the founding fathers believed. It is in virtually all, their private documents when they talked about this issue. Go read them for yourself. All the letters, all the statements and the speeches, go read them. But one of the things I mentioned during my speech on Saturday was that firearms are used to prevent more crimes than they are used to commit by an order of magnitude, actually several orders of magnitude. Well, today, WorldNet Daily published an article. And this is just absolutely fascinating. So since the 1990s, Florida State University criminologist Gary Kleck and partner Mark Gertz have claimed as many as 2.2 million Americans use firearms to defend themselves every year. Okay, 2.2 million every year. Okay, now a lot of people were attacking that. Oh, it's partisan, blah, 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 blah. Well, now it's been revealed that an unpublished CDC, Centers for Disease Control study, in the 1990s found 2.46 million defensive gun uses per year. Not only validating Kleck and Gertz and their study, but calling into question why this is unpublished, right? And this goes back to what I was just talking about with the EPA, right? Okay, so you can't take a look at the data that might be against your opinion or your agenda. But the fact of the matter is, that's almost 4 times, okay? Now, I've heard up to 5 to 10 times as many. And I'm talking about guns that are used to prevent crimes versus commit crimes, okay? So this is very clear that the presence of firearms is actually good at stopping crime, which most of us already knew. Here's the data to prove it. Again, WorldNet Daily has that. I think I'm going to publish that one up. That's pretty incredible. I think a lot of people need to see that. You probably have a lot of family members that need to see that as well. All right. Also on the national front, Jim Rickards, again predicting the IMF is going to launch a digital crypto SDR, strategic drawing rights, as a world currency, essentially replacing the U.S. petrodollar, at least as a transaction settler between countries. So he said that might be the end of April, May, June. I don't know. We'll see. But I think it's something you all should know about. All right. Now we're going to talk quickly on the regional front. And this is where we're going to get into a couple of these things I mentioned at the top of the show. Okay. But first, not to be outdone by anything, Seattle has come up with another new idea for attack. These guys must go to sleep thinking about, actually Scripture talks about that, doesn't it? Go to sleep thinking about how to tax people to death. I mean, this is craziness. So anyway, they want, this is no joke, okay? they want to do a 26-cent, tax on employees, which would amount to essentially $540 per employee per year for eligible businesses. So it's essentially quite literally a tax on employment. I don't know how many economic laws you can violate in one tax, but I think that one probably takes it. And they're going to think everything's going to go really well. Unbelievable. That's Seattle for you, folks. So I'm not posting that because I don't want to give it any more other than to tell you that they're probably going to try that at the state level next year. So we need to be ever vigilant. Ever vigilant. All right, now into the things I was talking about. First, Washington State Fusion Center. And this is coming from Muckrock, okay? Now, Muckrock is an organization that sends out a lot of Freedom of Information requests and gathers them together, okay? Thousands of FOIA requests. And recently, they got a response to a request back from the Washington State Fusion Center in regards to investigations into Antifa and various white supremacy groups. Got back a file titled EM, standing for electromagnetic, effects on human body, okay? And in it were diagrams of psychoelectronic weapon effects. In addition to that, was a diagram for remote mind control and remote brain mapping. Okay, these are the diagrams that were sent back as part of the public records request. Now, you don't know who created it. Nobody at this point knows who created these documents. However, this comes on the heels of a couple revelations, one of them actually a series on Netflix. And if you have not, if you haven't heard of what I'm about to say, you can check it out on Netflix. But it's a series called Wormwood. Now, it's kind of a creepy series, I'm just going to tell you. But it explores something known as MK Ultra, which were mind experiments by the Central Intelligence Agency that led to the death of a man. That's what the whole series is about. And his son is the one that's kind of narrating this. Here's the part that is key for us to understand. All right. Mind experiments on the mind, okay? Attempting to connect the mind to artificial limbs, trying to map the mind, trying to understand how memories are formed. I personally have been to a lab here in Spokane that studies how memories are formed on dendritic tendrils in your brain. Yes, that is a word. And I literally watched a memory form in real time, literally. It's amazing technology. And what they're ostensibly doing is searching for ways to combat Alzheimer's, dementia, etc. But the idea that, that we study the mind and how to remotely control the mind or allow the mind to remotely control other things, that's happening. That's science. That's fact. That's not conspiracy. That's just the way it is, okay? And you can't argue that. There are hundreds and hundreds of articles out there and labs doing this. Again, I personally have seen this where they're studying memories. And I asked, and the obvious implication is, and I asked, well, if you know how a memory forms, can you not then figure out how to create one? And there's, a broad smile among the folks that I asked that. But the fact of the matter is that that's the obvious implication. If you can figure it out, one way, you could figure it out the other. And all of these experiments that were occurring, that came out as part of MKUltra, which is extraordinarily well documented as real, raised some interesting questions when this comes out of the Washington State Fusion Center. And maybe they had it because they were monitoring somebody that had it. I don't know. But I think for us, what it does is it gets us thinking about the technologies that are out there, where you can think and a light bulb turns on. That's real. You can think and a hand that is an artificial hand will move. That's real. They're testing this stuff. And what are the implications into the future? And I think that this is something we should be thinking about, because technology is advancing so fast. If we don't start thinking about some of these things now and how they could be potentially abused and what protections we can put in place now, we will be reacting to it later. And this has been the problem that I've seen when I brought up issues like this, like, remember micro drones, micro aerial vehicles, and everyone's like, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. And then all of a sudden, sure enough, they're debuting them everywhere, and then we're reacting to it when we had the opportunity to deal with it ahead of time. All right. Next thing. All right, I want you all to write this down, because this is the one that really made me upset, because I asked, is there a law regarding weather modification in Washington State? I was told repeatedly, no, but there is. RCW 43.37. It is an entire chapter in our RCWs dealing with weather modification and what people need to do if they want to modify the weather. Notice of intent, publication, RCW 43.37.140. For 3 straight weeks in a paper of common circulation, you've got to post it, publish it. There needs to be a permit for each operation. Now, I'm telling you right now, this to me, we should be doing some public records requests to see how many permits have been let to do weather modification in Washington State. Why do I say that? Because we're agricultural dependent here. We've had catastrophic wildfires. Has weather modification been going on in Washington State? When? Who? How long? How often? And oh, by the way, nobody can call that conspiracy theory any longer, because there is an entire RCW which was enacted in 1973 in regards to this. So I think it bears some investigation. And go check it out for yourself, RCW 43.37, and start asking some questions. Now, this was brought to my attention by a guy that's going to be at the Red Pill Expo. He's got a website called climateviewer.org, climateviewer.org. Go check it out for yourself. It's got laws of across the United States on this issue, and also the federal laws on this issue. And he's done a lot of scientific investigation into this and the effects that this can have on vast agricultural areas like Washington State. So check it out, view it for yourself, and think. All right, local front. Red Pill Expo is coming up here June 21st through 23rd, downtown Spokane, the Convention Center. You can find it online. Just type in Red Pill Expo, and it'll come right up. Yours truly and many other people are going to be there. I look forward to seeing you then. Also, coming up May 5th, Center Place, Spokane Valley, Washington, 3 o'clock, the Freedom Project. Talking about the crisis in education. That's going to be our guest today, Dr. Duke Pesta. You guys can take a look online about this, but look, come find out, because he's not going to be talking just about the crisis, but about the solutions. Also on the local front, Freedom Rally Fundraiser for me, coming up on May 8th at Trezzy Farm Winery, 6 o'clock. This is the annual event I do We're going to have a lot of good folks there, awards, great dinner. So again, May 8th, Treasury Farm Winery. And that'll be at 6 o'clock. And that's the briefing. Remember, the antidote to dependency and socialism is to be a God-fearing, self-reliant, freedom-loving American. Thank you to everybody that's been praying for the show. And make sure you go to Patriot Radio US on Facebook. That's all it is, Facebook.com/Patriot Radio US. Like the page, share it with your friends and family, and share the podcast as well. It's on iTunes and on Podbean. And if you want to keep us on the air, you can always go to voteshea.com. And just appreciate all the support we've been getting lately, especially. Well, again, my guest today is Dr. Duke Pesta from the Freedom Project, talking about education today. We've had him on before. It's really an honor to have you on again, sir, and I look forward to seeing you here in a couple short weeks.
Hey, Matt, thanks for having me again. And I forgot, Red Tail is going to be in Spokane. I'll be there as well this year, so that's great, too.
Oh, looking forward to it. Yeah, I was talking with Jim Lee on this weather modification stuff, and he said, yeah, you've got laws in Washington. I was like, what are you talking about? I've been looking through that for years. Amazing. Anyway, well, let's talk about education today. What is the crisis in education from your view?
Well, I think it's obvious to anybody who watches the news or has kids in school or is even moderately informed. It's so clear what's happening in schools all across the country at every level, from pre-K all the way through high school, that our kids are being turned into Petri dishes, that we know that in states like from Wisconsin to Washington and from Maine to Florida, kids are performing way below their grade level on all their tests. In Wisconsin, we just got results in, and only 35% of Wisconsin school kids are actually performing at grade level. And in the inner cities, our most vulnerable kids, inner city kids, are performing at 15%. Only 15% are performing at grade level. We know across the board that from our college entrance exams, our kids are knowing less than they did before. Their skills are down. And so what's going on in the schools when all of this performance keeps going the wrong way? What are they filling up that time with? Well, what they're doing is they are using our kids for sociological experiments, for progressive tinkering. They are introducing our kids at very young ages to transgenderism, to sex, to homosexuality, to gay marriage, to environmentalist issues that are way above their age level and their critical thinking skills. They are pushing progressive politics and white privilege on our kids now in elementary, middle, and high school. So they are using the power of the public school, the government school, to first and foremost engage in social justice engineering. And only after that are they interested in educational achievement, and it shows. It shows from every measurable metric we have. What we've been on your show, Matt, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, warning about Common Core, and everything we said that was going to happen with Common Core has come through. Lower standards, overall one-size-fits-all education, meaningless high-stakes tests, and the thing that we pointed out on your show a number of times, a huge substitution of politics, ideology, and progressivism for genuine critical thinking. That's what we're seeing in our schools now.
So let's talk then a little bit about, I want to just cut to the chase. A lot of people say, well, this isn't indoctrination. This is just people trying to do their best in the classroom. You guys attack curriculum, but teachers really can ultimately teach anything they want to. So it's not affecting kids as you're trying to allege, but that really is not true. This is systemic.
Yeah, it is absolutely systemic. And I don't know, on every front you have evidence of this. First of all, the testing doesn't lie. All the testing mechanisms, all the own state reporting shows that kids are falling farther and farther behind. This is not even arguable. For somebody to say, hey, our public school teachers, and many of them do mean well, but they're handicapped. They're put in schools with curriculums and pedagogy and imperatives from the state and federal level. They are being forced to become babysitters and psychologists and social counselors, all the things that they're not trained to do at the expense of doing what they should be doing, which is just rolling up their sleeves and finding any way necessary to teach our kids proper math, reading, science. They're not able to do it. And you just take a couple of examples, man. Parkland. Now, look at what's happening at Parkland, right? With that horrible shooting, don't wish it on anybody. It's a horrible thing. And yet, these student activists, these kids now who have been recruited by the progressive left to make the case against guns and the Second Amendment. The thing that always blows me away, Matt, is that when you listen to their statistics, they're wrong. I mean, they're factually wrong. about what they say, how they describe guns, what they even think assault weapons are. They're wrong about what the Second Amendment does. They're wrong about who to blame primarily for the Parkland shooting. You're going to jump to the NRA, the nearest branch of the nearest headquarters was 1,000 miles away, and you're not going to look at how the school failed and the counselors failed and the local police failed and the local FBI failed. You're going to blame it on the NRA. And yet we reached a point here in this country where to criticize their information is to make you an a bigot, a bully of these kids. We're conferring on these young kids sort of an absolute moral authority on a number of issues, but we've left them completely ignorant about what actually constitutes facts and knowledge and debate and argument. And so you see, and Parkland's just one example of this. If you think about the voting patterns of millennials, why is it that millennial kids in this country, actually favor now, according to a recent survey, they favor socialism over capitalism, and yet when they're asked to explain socialism, they can't do it. We have all sorts of not just anecdotal, but all sorts of serious evidence that what's been going on in our schools for 30, 40 years now is really starting to impact the electorate. These kids are being mobilized as a sort of unthinking mob to vote for leftist issues, and they lack the requisite information, history, knowledge, and thinking skills to be able to make even basic critical distinctions in terms of what liberty is versus tyranny, socialism versus capitalism, free markets versus oppression. They have no knowledge to be able to judge these things.
I've met a couple people that are in the education profession. One is a family member, another one is a colleague, and absolutely adamant. Curriculum is irrelevant. Teachers will teach whatever they want to teach anyways. And I said, well, why does there appear to be an agenda with Planned Parenthood sex ed curriculum, et cetera, not just in, sex ed, but across the board, history, science, everything. Why does it appear there's an agenda in each curriculum if it's not effective? And there wasn't really an answer to that. Do you see the issue of curriculum as real and as part of this crisis?
Well, of course it is. Teachers can only use the text that the school provides them. Teachers are not allowed to walk into an English class and get rid of all of the Common Core sanctioned texts and buy textbooks for the kids through. They can't do that. So what happened about 4 or 5 years ago is that the public schools, were emptied out of all the pre-Common Core curriculum, all the pre-Common Core textbooks, all the pre-Common Core worksheets. And in fact, I'll challenge you to do something, Matt. If you want to know the veracity of what I'm telling you, go online and just spend a half an hour and see if you can buy a textbook from a major textbook company for any level, from elementary, middle, or high school that is not Common Core aligned. Try to find any textbook for any age kid from kindergarten to high school that is not aligned or compliant to the Common Core. These are the only materials that are in our teachers' classrooms. The idea, and not only that, the test on which we're preparing kids month after month after month, these big standardized tests, they're geared to Common Core. So this ridiculous argument that, teachers are free to do what they want, I've got it on, and you're going to hear it when I come to Washington next week. I've got the architect of Common Core, I've got David Coleman on tape making the following statement, and I quote, "Your teachers will teach to our tests. There is no force strong enough on this earth to prevent that." That is David Coleman, the architect of Common Core. I will show you and source the information, and I'll give you the video clip. He said it, and he's right. This idea that teachers are free, if they are so free, right, to do whatever they want, please explain why performance is going down. If teachers were free to buck failed Common Core pedagogy, failed Common Core textbooks and methodologies, then they would be doing it, wouldn't they? The teachers aren't stupid, as you said. That many of our teachers are solid people. If they could do the right way of teaching, they would, but they can't. And that's why our kids' performance keeps going the other way. Did you ask these friends of yours or these relatives? Did you ask them, well, then how do you account for the fact that our kids' performance is going down even by comparison to the weak standards that Common Core implemented?
I have seen quite an argument over this, but I want to just ask you a practical question. You're the academic director of Freedom Project Academy. When you're talking to some new parents that are coming into the program, and you talk about things like formal logic and critical thinking and, looking at primary source documents, what do you see as the greatest deficiency for people that are trying to bring their kids out of the system? I mean, what kind of stands out as the big neon sign that they're lacking today in their education?
Well, there's a number of them. First and foremost, I would say accountability. One of the things that we do at our school is we hold kids responsible. We give them assignments, and then we give them a deadline. If they miss a deadline, they get a 0. They don't get extensions. We try to prepare them for the real world. And the hardest transition for parents, well, they know that their kids are getting ideological garbage in the schools. The parents who come to us know that it's become a toxic sociological experiment. There's bullying, there's cyberbullying, then there's the school bullying, right? Bullying kids to be anti-guns, bullying kids to believe progressive ideology. So when the moms and dad come to us, their kids have been in school for 4, 5, 7 years in the public schools. It's trying to get the kids on a schedule where they actually are accountable for the work they do. That means if you have an assignment, they have to turn it in. If there is a test, you have to pass it before you can move on. If you fail the bulk of a course, you fail the class and have to repeat it. You don't just get socially promoted. Even our well-meaning conservative parents struggle because their kids, however much time they spent in the public schools, they didn't learn that skill, number one. And I want to let your audience know, we give free exams. So if you want to find out where your kids are vis-a-vis our kids, if we want our kids to do high school calculus, by the time they graduate high school, we want them to be prepared for calculus. That means at 4th grade, 6th grade, and 9th grade, you have to have them at certain levels of math. We give absolutely free placement tests in reading and math. So any kid, even if you don't want to take our classes, they'll show you. We'll give you a 4th grade reading and a 4th grade math test for free. We'll grade it. And we will show you concretely where your kid is. And the average student, Matt, who comes to us from the public school, on average, is 2 years behind their grade level. So we get 6th graders coming to us, we have to start them at 4th grade. We get 9th graders coming to us, we have to start them at 7th grade because they are 2 full years behind in their reading, math, and other skills. And so this is a very easily demonstrable thing. That's why we give these placement exams free. You can take the exam free. You're under no obligation to join our school, but you really ought to see where your kids are, and there's nothing in the public schools that can measure that for you until you look outside for a objective standard. Again, if we want kids to be able to read Shakespeare and the classics by the time they're seniors in high school, then they better be reading X at grade 6. They better be reading at 9 at grade 9. It's not that complicated. So we'll show you what the range is, what we want to accomplish. You'll be pretty staggered if your kids have spent most of their time in public schools. You'll be pretty staggered to see that generally speaking, they are way behind.
So what would you say to the single mom or the family where both parents are working? Hey, we just don't, Dr. Pesta, this is all great and good. We know it's the right thing to do. We just don't have time. We don't have time to do this, to homeschool our kids or use somebody else's curriculum. I mean, what would you say? What would be your message to them?
And I say this with all due respect because I think you're right. I'm really glad you phrased it that way. You didn't go to what other people say. Most moms and dads, it becomes a money issue. It's not. It's not that expensive to homeschool your kids, but it's the time. Moms and dads feel they don't have the time. I guess, and I mean, this is going to sound blunt, but if you're working 2 jobs, and almost every parent I've heard this from, if you're working 2 jobs and your kids have iPads and Nike tennis shoes and you take 3-week vacations every summer and you get your kids designer clothes and you have them enrolled in really expensive extracurriculars, they're playing piano or doing ballet or dance or whatever it is, if you can afford, if you're working that hard to put kids into those kind of luxury situations because all the other kids have them, but you are not providing your kids with a top-notch education that will allow them to take care of their families one day, what are you doing? I mean, I can promise you this, that 40 years from now, your kids aren't going to remember the tennis shoes, and they're not going to remember this or that lesson. They're going to remember that you gave them an education that has prepared them to look after themselves and look after their families. We're spending a lot of time and a lot of effort trying to raise money to give kids things, but we're not spending the time and the effort to give them first and foremost the one legacy as parents that we owe them. We don't owe them luxury. We don't owe them vacations. We don't owe them toys and electronics and technology and video games. What we owe our kids is a future, the ability, once they leave us, leave our houses, to look after themselves and their families. If you're not giving the kids that, then what's the rest of it for?
I agree. What is the rest of it for? If we're not leaving freedom to our posterity, what's the natural result? What's going to happen? So, you're coming here to Spokane here in the next couple of weeks. You're going to be here on May 5th, 3 o'clock, Center Place out in Spokane Valley. What can people expect, and why would you want them to come to this event?
Because, number one, they're going to be very, very upset when we're done. We're going to give them a comprehensive, step-by-step, logically connected, well-documented presentation about exactly what's happening in their schools, what's going on across the country. Everything we say is going to come from the mouths of the people who are doing it. And so you will walk out of that talk utterly convinced that there's a problem. We don't just leave it at that, though. We're offering solutions. We have solutions, not just us, our particular program, but we're going to give you a lot of options of things that you can do and ways that you can minimize the problems or the perceived problems of being responsible for our kids. Look, whether you're a Bible-based Christian believer or whether you're just somebody who believes in logic and common sense, according to both of those systems of thought, we are the primary educators of our kids. If we're going to farm our kids out to government strangers who do not share our worldview, do not share our politics, and most certainly do not share our religion, if we're going to do that 8 to 10 hours a day for 9 months out of the year, the logic is obvious. You are going to lose them. And if you lose them, if our values, like you just said, man, our values, our freedoms and patriotism, our liberty, our country, if that's being corroded away, not because kids don't want it, but because kids aren't taught it, I can think of no higher calling than to retake our kids' education and make sure we're not just providing for their future, but we're providing for the country's future. So you're going to leave that talk. And every single slide that I show the parents on that day, you can have for free. The moms and dads can have them. We'll send you the information, verify it, fact-check me. We've given 700 of these talks. By all means, try to prove it's wrong. And when you can't prove it's wrong, then I pray to God that the wake-up call will have reached you, and you recognize that there can be no greater thing a parent does than to provide for their kids' future this way.
Now, I have talked on this quite a bit. You know, I've had you on the show before. People still try to make the argument about socialization. And if I homeschool my kids or I put them in a private co-op, that they just won't be properly socialized. If you could give the counter argument to that, and I have an idea of what you're going to say.
Yeah, every mom who's ever hit me with that, I say to her, every dad, I said, is your kid good at talking to people now? Oh, yeah, my kid's very vocal. He's very sociable. Does your kid make a lot of friends? He's well, yeah. On the playground and at sports teams and at school, he's got lots of friends. Is your kid polite? Is your kid able to deal with people without being selfish or angry or violent? Of course. Well, what makes you think that if you pull them out and homeschool them, that's going to end? That somehow this idea that if you pull a kid out of public school and give him alternative forms of school, that means he's going to be locked in a room by himself 24 hours a day. On the contrary, homeschooling, you can do in 2 or 3 hours of homeschooling every day what it takes the government school 7 or 8 hours to do. With all of the recess and the homeroom and the assemblies and the endless, all the other stuff, the lunch lines, you can give a solid education in 2 or 3 hours a day, which means you can take your kids to piano lessons if you want. You can have them play soccer. There are all sorts of homeschool co-op leagues for sports across the country. Many states, including Wisconsin, I don't know about Washington, but many states allow homeschool family kids to play on local government school sports teams if you want them to, or participate in drama clubs and stuff. Most states do that. And the thing I would simply say, too, and I think probably this is what you would have said as well, Matt, is there are 1,000 ways to. The one thing kids really don't need to be trained in is socialization. I mean, my goodness, the one thing you want. Think about how these public school kids, they're in these government classrooms all day, and then they come home and they spend 6 hours on playing video games. You want to talk about a socialization killer? It's not schooling, home or public. What kills socialization is all the time wedded to technology, all the time alone playing video games, all the time with headsets on their heads that drown out everybody else. And the same parents generally complaining about socialization skills of homeschoolers are the same parents who won't tell their kids to put the phone down at dinner time or take the headset away from them, or if they're not getting good grades in school, pull the video games away. So there are 1,000 different ways, but giving kids an education they can use for life is hard. Finding them friends and entertainment opportunities, that's like second nature.
You know, the other thing that I guess I would add to it is, you know, if you consider socialization learning sex ed curriculum that makes a grown person blush, probably don't want to have that kind of socialization because it's also depending on what socialization's happening out there. You know?
Yeah, think about the socialization they get in public schools. They get exposed to bullies, number one. Number two, they are highly sexualized. It's not just kids, older kids pressuring younger kids for sexuality. It's the elementary and middle school grade classroom now that's putting really adult content in front of these kids. We're asking 6 and 7-year-olds to grapple with issues of gender identity. These kids can't even think critically yet. Their brains haven't developed that way. Think about what goes on in the hallways with the bullying. And now we know from Parkland and other places that even if the cops know there's a problem, even if the FBI knows there's a problem, even if the teachers and the school administrators know there's a problem, demonstrably the public schools cannot now protect your kids. They are unable to do it. The mechanisms by which really dangerous kids are being funneled out just don't work. And so you can talk all you want about mental health and gun laws and gun banning. The fact is that if somebody wants to hurt your kids in the public schools, there's very little public schools can do. The one thing every bad guy knows is that all schools are gun-free zones. They know that. If they can get a gun in there, your kids aren't going to have much chance. If you keep those kids at home, you're sparing them, not just from the occasional nut job with a gun. You're sparing them the bullying, the drugs, the peer pressure. You're sparing them the incessant ideology in the classroom, the incredible push to sanction free speech, to punish them, kids showing up in Trump T-shirts being sent home. This kind of bullying that you get from government schools, it is much, 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 much worse than what kids will experience from other kids in many instances. So what exactly kind of socialization you expect your kids are going to get at a government school?
I want to end with the solutions. You have a lot of resources out there for parents of all stripes. If you could, tell them about that and where they can go to find out more.
Well, again, we are one option, and we're not for everybody, just like homeschool's not for everybody, just like government school's not for everybody. We are Freedom Project Academy. You can visit us at FPEUSA.org, FPEUSA.org. And what we do is we're a complete online school, which means we have live teachers that can teach your kid in your living room with other kids across the country in the same virtual classroom. Your kids have social friends. Your kids have, in every FPE classes, there's kids from all over the country and all over the world. We've got kids in 14 foreign countries taking classes with our kids. The pen pals, the email friendships that develop over this, families in the summer taking vacations to visit the school friends. You have socialization. And our teachers, if you're afraid that you don't have the skill or the intellect or the time to give your kids a really first-class education, our teachers will. Our teachers do all the grading, all the assignments, all that kind of record keeping we do, and the classes are live. So once one of our live classes is over, it's uploaded. So you as the mom, you could watch every single second of every single school day if you wish. So you'll always know what's going on in your kid's classroom, unlike the government schools, where unless they tell you, the kid comes home and tells you something, you have the vaguest idea what they're doing with your kids every day. So this is the one way we allow you to be partners and controllers of your kids' education, but we'll do the sort of teaching. We'll do the teaching. You guys become basically, the mom and dad becomes the principal and the supervisor. They can watch as much as they want. They can drill their kids. If their kid is struggling in math, right, they don't just hear the problem one time from the teacher and then go home and try to remember it. They can replay that same math lesson at home at night with mom, and they can watch it 2 or 3 times until the kid gets the answer, something that can't be done in the public schools. So it's one way, I think, to empower parents, even if they don't think that they can homeschool, to oversee us, to become sort of the principals and the superintendents of our teachers and watch and see how they do what they do. And if there's ever a problem, we're just a phone call away.
Dr. Duke Pesta, Freedom Project Academy, thank you very much for everything you're doing. I look forward to seeing you coming up here on May 5th, my friend, and Godspeed to you and safe travels. Thanks for being on the show today.
Can't wait to meet you, shake your hand in person, Matt. We will see you in about a week. Hope we get a big turnout.
All right, sounds good. Again, May 5th, 3 o'clock, Center Place out in Spokane Valley. It's a Saturday, okay? So just show up. It's free. You're going to learn a lot. You're going to learn probably more than you thought you would learn. But you're also going to learn about the solutions. And that's what's key. Talking about all of the different ways to overcome the objections we're talking about. Hey, don't have enough money, don't have enough time. It's really never about money. It's more about time, socialization, all of those things. And this is right happening the day after the sex ed sit-out here in Spokane. And folks, understand something. These powerful forces that are at work in education to change curriculum, like Planned Parenthood, they're not just going to go away. Read the curriculum. This isn't some accidental mistake. Look at the diagram. I mean, it made me blush when I read some of that stuff. It was horrible. You know, they're giving this to 12-year-olds. They're not going to go away. They might stop for a little while, but they're going to come back again and again and again. And I've talked to a lot of Christian families who say, Matt, we need to be salt and light in the world. That is true, we do. But first, we are called to train up our children in the way they should go. And right now, we are allowing other people to train up our children with the curriculum that we may not agree with. And in most cases, we don't agree with, or is pushing an agenda. And I've talked to teachers in the public school system who want the freedom to teach, just get out of my way. But all these forces are right down on top of them. You've got to teach this, you got to teach the test, you got to do this, and you got to do this. And it's all part of this agenda, and they see where it's going. They're dealing with the problem kids in school who lack discipline. So my question to you that I want to leave you today with is this. Is it worth it to take the chance? Or is it better to train up a child in the way that they should go so that we know for sure they're going to be followers of Christ, preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ throughout the whole world and making disciples of nations? This is Matt Shea. Thank you once again for joining me today. Remember, May 5th, 3 o'clock, Spokane Valley. May God bless all of you, and may he make this generation the greatest one.